Order. And the flag pledge is behind you. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. That's Julie, Mary, Michelle, Carol. Nathan and myself. We have
6. Dallas is MIA.
Dallas is en route.
He's probably, yeah.
He'll be here soon. He's got a day job. Okay, I see the first thing we have is agenda item 2, board comments.
Okay, that's over here.
Silence means no. Agenda item 3, integrated plan approval. It's an action item. And I guess I'd like to say something. I know I came in, what was it, 2 days ago? When did I come in? So I hadn't read this, and it's a 28 page. It was, it's extremely well written too. I want to thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
Tim.
it was extremely well written. And yeah, I think you did a great job. In fact, if I'd say anyone wants to know what's happening in the district, read this, and let's get you for sure the 80%. So yeah, really good job. With that, is there any other discussion or general comments about it?
I have a presentation to kind of summarize it and explain the integrated guided process. I appreciate the comments and your time looking that over. So you have essentially, which one do you want, PowerPoint or? It makes no difference, whatever's easiest to flip through probably. Did you have a comment or question?
And explain why we need to do this.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So, integrated application presentation. Oregon's integrated guidance is a combination of several grants. These are non-competitive grants, but they have a lot of strict guidelines we have to follow in order to actually receive the money. There's quite a bit of steps, as you'll see from the work here, that's up front that needs to take place. There are several steps where the board is involved. There's a whole lot of reporting attached to it. And the grants initially started as SIA, Student Investment Account, the high school success, and then there's an early indicator, early warning system. It's like a EIIS is the grant, and there's a few grants they fit in here, but there's no money associated with them. So as part of the process for the next round of budgeting in the next biennium, we have to initiate this process. So I wanted to give you a little bit about what we've gone through, who contributed to the plan, a plan overview, and then what's next. So the large packet you have, it really is a full kind of synopsis of what we do in this district. And it's answering the questions provided by the state, so we can't change the questions, those are in bold. And really getting sort of in detail about what it is we do in these areas and what we plan to do based on our strategic planning process. So I've sort of intertwined the two. Things that aren't funded through the grant are also included in these explanations because there's requirements that have to be met by the district in order to receive funding, and they allow what's called the braiding of funds. So to meet some of the requirements, we can use funds from other sources that aren't part of the grant, but we also want to talk about them and highlight them in here. So you might see things when you're reading this that you won't actually see a budget item that aligns to it. And that's why, because maybe we're trying to show how we're braiding some other funds into meeting the requirements of the grant. As we're going through this, after we're done, we'll open this up for comments from the board, questions from the board, and open it up for public hearing, which is also a requirement. And then ultimately seek board approval for the first phase of the grant application. And so there's just some of the summary there. It was initially these grants were all separate grants. So so there was a lot of pushback, like, could you make this process easier for us? And integrate the grants and make a combined process for community engagement. So sometimes we were going to a community engagement for this grant, community engagement for this grant, community engagement for that grant. So this was a process designed to try to streamline it. It streamlined the community engagement pieces. All they did with the grants is really stack them on top of each other. They still have separate reporting, they still have different requirements. That didn't really make that easier, it actually made it more complicated for the public records. So we can go ahead and go on here.
But I'm just gonna say this, I gotta say this. Leave it to ODE to be responsive to the voice of districts who said you need to help make the process easier. Let's try to combine them so that we can make it easier. For ODE, out of the goodness of their heart, to listen. And then to ultimately create a process that was harder than the original process to begin with.
And the ODE team is very responsive and very supportive. I will say that. So if we are confused and frustrated, they will help out. And they're quick to point out things that you may have missed along the way that still need to be done. So there you see the different things that are kind of associated with the integrated guidance, high school success, student investment account. So each one of the high school success, student investment account, and then now and actually this is pre-early. So the other one that's in here is early literacy, which were the funds. So the early literacy is integrated into the writing of it. It's in the rest of these slides and it's in our budget. The other ones there, we don't really get funding directly from ODE for those other ones, except for the bottom one, which is a small amount of money, about $6,000 per year. Everyday Matters has to do with attendance, so. Common elements, they all require authentic engagement, equity-based decision-making process, focus on students who have been historically marginalized. These are things written into the grant guidelines, and if you take some time to read my section number 2, you'll see how I'm ensuring that we're meeting those guidelines using a process that's more in tune with our community, and it's what has been coined by me recently. I think I'm gonna write a book about this, inclusive excellence. So it's really about focusing on all students and providing what all students need to succeed. So looking through the lens of how can we address every student's needs to make sure we're not leaving any students behind. Okay.
Tim, I want to thank you for defining under
Yeah.
equity advance. You said when we talk about an equity lens, or being equity advanced, we simply mean taking a thoughtful, student-centered approach to our decisions. But I want to thank you for defining what that is.
Yes.
Because often equity is thrown around and I think it can mean many things to many different people.
Sure.
Yeah.
You bet. So again, there's a summary of the programs that are included. We can go past this. Go ahead and go past this one. The planning team was really the strategic planning process. So what we wanted to do was align our strategic planning process to the integrated guidance application as well. So because the strategic planning process was so the community was so involved, the teachers, the staff, the students, multiple layers of community were involved with that. It really did meet all the requirements of engagement, and it is true authentic engagement. So the strategic planning team is the integrated guidance planning team. So we looked at basically a comprehensive needs assessment. looked at the quality education model. QEM is, it's an interesting thing that we talk about a lot because it requires a lot more funding to actually really completely do it. But it does have a lot of things that are beneficial for districts to include in their plans. Looked at some different regional CTE information, potential impact of our student groups, and developed and it's, what you're seeing is a 2-year budget plan, but it's considered a 4-year integrated guidance plan. And after the next 2 years, we'll go through the community engagement process again to redevelop the plan and make sure it still aligns to our previous goals. Okay. So again, here I talk about inclusive excellence in our schools and recognizing and responding to each and every student's unique strengths and challenges. And to do that, we analyze data, engage in multiple community groups, and develop targeted strategies aligned to the funding to ensure every student receives what they need. Okay. The highlights of the community engagement process really go back to us about a year ago seeking a partner to help develop our strategic plan. That partner was Performance Fact, and through their processes, we embraced the diverse voices and perspectives of our community, including business leaders, community leaders, parents, staff from all groups, and our students as well. And so a variety of different teams contributed to that. The core planning team was at the center of that process, and then we had the student voice team, family groups, instructional focus team, different school departments were represented in our instructional focus teams. We had the alignment team, and of course the school board was a big part of that as well. Had community forums, and then the superintendent's leadership team. Overall, 24 planning sessions, over 105 participants, and over 2,000 voices contributed to the plan. Okay. So the comprehensive needs assessment included multiple data sources. So we have sort of the main 5 components through ODE's Achievement Data Insights, and that's the regular attenders, 3rd grade reading, 9th grade on track, 4-year and 5 graduation and 5-year completion rates. We looked at local data, which included student well-being and climate surveys, credit attainment and student behavior data. And we looked at CTE program success and participation data, and looked at it disaggregated, meaning we broke it down by student groups to highlight areas that we may be missing some students and not realizing it. And identified some key areas: attendance, literacy, graduation outcomes. Again, reiterated the planning sessions there, highlighting the needs assessment process, and then integrated a plan and the desired outcomes based off of the needs, develop strategies and a budget aligned to that in order to build a plan based on transparency and trust. Some of the high priority strengths and concerns, some of the strengths and concerns were the same. They were essentially supportive relationships with the teachers, engaging in learning, attendance, so areas of strength, but also areas of concern, because we know we can improve those areas and we know that they have such a strong effect on student outcomes. Achievement gaps were noted. And again, some of this, this right here is directly from the strategic plan. So I'm sort of just highlighting it here because you've all seen it. And so math achievement at secondary level and peer relationships and bullying were also concerns. Okay. You have, the next few slides you have on your large papers. So this here is outcomes and strategies. Based off of the needs assessment, the plan would require us to develop a list of outcomes, strategies aligned to those outcomes, and then we'll get down into the budget, which will be an actual list of activities. And these outcomes and strategies, they are all aligned to the strategic plan as well. But you'll notice that it's not a direct one-to-one correlation. So the strategic plan has maybe a key, signature strategy or an outcome, and it might be hit in several areas here, which is why it's not just a one-to-one correlation, because we're also, again, trying to meet the requirements of several different grants to ensure the money flows. So I had to make sure that, but if we hire a graduation coach for high school, that it meets a certain requirement. It's got to check certain boxes in order to get that funding. So that's why you're not just seeing 4 strategies or 4 goals like you do on the strategic plan, but all those goals are hit within these outcomes and strategies. So we're focused on K-3 students will achieve grade level ELA standards by the end of each school year. So that does correlate to the strategic plan, which also includes math and social emotional learning, but this is tied to the actual early literacy grant, which is why this wording is just about ELA. And then based on that desired outcome, to have all K-3 students achieve at grade level by the end of each school year, we then have 3 strategies listed, which are essentially aligning our budgeting process to the desired outcome. So those strategies, basically, we have a literacy coach who provides professional development and coaching support. We need to have some staff to support high-dose tutoring and extended learning opportunities. Some of these things are not in the first round of budgeting and the first round of planning for the early literacy grant. But now we were required to hit all of these different areas. So we had to have something that was around professional development and coaching. We had to have something that was focused on high-dose tutoring and something that focuses on extended learning opportunities. So sometimes when we talk about unfunded mandates, this is a huge one that unless you're taking this grant and creating an extended learning opportunity like summer school focused on literacy K-3, you have to come up with that funding elsewhere. And that's where we have to have the goal in here, the outcome in here, but that's where it allows us to then braid funds, meet those needs somewhere else. So essentially by the end of these 2 years, this is a requirement that we learned today actually, that we needed to include that in this grant. And then we have some supplemental materials to help support those outcomes. Outcome A is focused on reading and mathematic performance for all students while closing achievement gaps. So again, you can see there's a direct correlation to our strategic plan there, which had to do with the academic achievement of all students and about closing the achievement gaps, in other words, accelerating students. Outcome B was on developing and improving multiple pathways to graduation that link our CTE programs and post-high school success. So you're hearing the multiple pathways to success in high school, achievement of all students, but also the grant requirement for high school success itself, which must include information on CTE programs and that we're using funds for that, and that we're also creating opportunities for post-high school success. In other words, the grant also requires you to provide opportunities for students to achieve college credit. And so we do have funding that goes to that. Without careful planning, it would be super easy to miss some of these requirements and miss out on opportunities for funding. We have outcome C was to create and support a school culture that addresses safety needs and social emotional needs of our students. So again, we heard that in our strategic plan over and over again. We have outcome D, 90% of students will be on track to graduate after completing 9th grade. Outcome E, students will document and track post-secondary plans and will move along a deliberate path through school towards their preferred next steps in college and career. Also something that you saw highlighted heavily in our strategic planning process. And outcome F, leverage strategies and supports for our attendance advocates to continue to work addressing chronic absenteeism. Quite a bit of information. And so again, that's why this document is 27, 28 pages, because we're trying to then write a narrative that captures all of this work. Go ahead and go to the next one. Here you're getting into really the true meat of the budget. So here is an opportunity for you to actually see, and it's much easier to read on this, although it is still small, exactly where funds are going. And I will point out that you have, if we look at the top, indirect administrative costs, those are costs that come off of the top of grants that help support our implementation of the grants. In other words, they help offset administrative costs. If that grant didn't exist, we might not need as many, a certain part of an administrator to do the job. So this helps offset those salaries so we can make sure this work gets done. It's not all coming from general fund. So that's important to note. We receive so many grants that help pay administrative salaries. So it's necessary to have those administrators in order to continue to receive the grants and to meet these requirements. And then to make sure, it's not just about putting the plans in place, it's about actually implementing from the district level to the school level to the classroom level to the individual student level. And that takes administrative support all along the way to make sure those things happen.
Tim, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Just so where does this grant money come from? And how is it allocated, like a certain amount of money based on the size of your district, or like how is it determined?
There are funding formulas for each grant from the state.
Okay.
And typically it is your student population, there's a correlation to that.
Is it
the
like, are
SIA
all school districts applying for this, or is like how?
I'm not aware, I would imagine, it would be foolish not to,
Okay,
because
so it's
the
something that
money's
most people would do.
guaranteed. Like SIA is funded through the corporate activity tax.
Okay.
The Student Success Act, Student Investment Account specifically is funded through the corporate activity tax. So the money's already carved out, it's there. For a district not to go through this process
Right, okay.
would be somewhat foolish, in my opinion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So if you look at graduation coaches, it's on 2 lines. I was just gonna point out that, so if we look at graduation coaches, we see outcome strategies. Those are what I just went over. So those are on this other page. Outcome B1, develop and improve multiple pathways to graduation. And high school alternative pathway program and graduation coaches is how we do it. So here's the funding that goes with that. It also aligns to F1, leveraging strategies and supports for attendance advocates. So the part of the grad work coach is to support attendance. And when you go over a little bit, I also have the strategic planning goals checked off that it's hitting. So you can also see where this funding meets our strategic planning process goals. Because we want to make sure, in the end, it was important that we could see that we're funding all of those goals, and that we're putting the resources where our plans are. And then you see it twice because there's money put in there for the actual salary. There's a few columns here that you don't see, which is like the actual accounting codes that go with those people. So really there's salaries and then associated payroll costs. and then a little bit of overtime, or extra duty put in there too. So that's why you see the line twice. Because it covers the whole salary of the individuals allocated there. And in the packet, there was a list of year one allocations, but it didn't have the dollar amounts associated with it, so I wanted to make sure you could see that. This will all be posted on our district website, so it's all available to the public. Again, full transparency is important with this, so we'll get this up there before the grant application is submitted. And as you kind of just glance down that list, I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to ask about any of those positions or any of the funds that are sort of set aside for those different areas.
So Tim, when we do our budgeting exercise in May and approve that budget, these funds are not included in that budget. They are included.
Yeah, when you are looking at the budget, you will be looking at the function level, fund and function levels. So you'll have the general fund, which is your state school fund, and then your property taxes. So the property taxes are getting paid to us directly from the county, and then the state school fund, those amounts, they vary depending on how much property tax you collect. So that's where that sort of offset and balance is. And then, so you'll see that in the general fund, and then the grants are all in special revenue funds. So you'll see all these in the 200s. So that'll be a combination of all of our grants, which is also in the budget. Then you have 300s, 400s, and some 5s and 6s.
Is there one specific special grant? Is it, like if there's one number they can look at for all of these, or is it split out?
No,
So high school success is different?
there's a number for high school success. Student investment account we have several numbers. Like you might see 263, 264, 265, like those are monies associated specifically with SIA. And that just allows us to make sure we're spending the money on the outcomes that we're saying we're gonna spend it on. So it makes sure that once the school board approves this, that we have a way of tracking those funds we can know exactly where the expenditures go. And to make sure that it's actually going where you think it's going, where the public thinks it's going.
So there's not gonna be a point where you look at the budget and go, oh, this next year we're budgeting for total activity for 25-26 is 3.581 for 25-50. You start rummaging through the budget, you try to find that number somewhere, you're not gonna find it. Because it's gonna be split up almost.
In the 200s, you'll see that, because there's other grants too that'll be in that. There's Title I allocations, there's just, for the overall 200 fund. But then you'll see it broken down to a certain level. Just not, it won't be, if we talk about it in the narratives in the front of the budget, we can address it through our discussions around the budget, and I can point to it, where the money is in the budget, but it's not just gonna, there's not gonna be a page that says this.
It's a lot of money.
It's a whole lot of money. This is a very important
So I
grant,
see why
yeah.
you'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, we were really excited when this source of funding came through to schools because it was highly needed.
Is this, I mean, we've done this before, correct? Is this number higher than it was before, or?
It's gone up a little bit. Our population has gone down. I mean, I guess you would say it's gone up, but it's really considered more flat funding just because our population's also gone down. So with the added increase in expenses and whatnot, it's not a whole lot of extra compared to what it was. Relatively, it's pretty equal, but dollar to dollar.
It's also quite specific to corporate activity tax. So rises and falls in corporate activity tax are reflected in what goes out to districts. Also, from a legislative level, corporate activity tax was built to primarily do what it's doing, come directly to schools. every legislative session, there are groups out there who want to carve out a little bit of it for their group, for their cause, for their area. And so part of what COSA and OSBA does with our lobbyists every session is to make sure that we try to block all of that so that it can stay coming to schools, because we don't want that to be watered down. That was the original intent, was for it to come to schools.
So some items, you know, we essentially carve out a line item and put a dollar amount in here, not quite knowing exactly what we'll spend in that area. If we don't spend in one area, that money is allowed to be reallocated anywhere on our approved list. And after the end of the 2 years, like you see there, $7.3 million is what we're expecting to see over the next 2 years. Any questions on that page right now? You're welcome, of course, if something pops up later. Take this home and study it and read it in your free time. You might
So
have
there's a
questions.
deadline for this.
I'm looking forward to that.
I bet, the first, I mean, it's neat to see what our schools are doing, like when you're putting something together like this packet and narrating it, it just, there is an element of it, it feels good to be part of a system that does so many good things for kids. It's very rewarding.
So how often can you apply for this grant? Is this
We go through this process every 2 years.
every 2 years? Yeah, so you can renew every 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I know it's like on university and college campuses, I know you can get like Title III grants, but you have to wait so long before you can reapply.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you get them for like 5 years and then you have to wait 2 years or something before you can apply again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if that's nice.
It is nice, yeah. They also allow what's called the tiered planning approach. So these are some tiered planning items that don't have dollars associated with them, but are things in areas where we could allocate dollars. Like, so let's say, there's been situations where, you might be looking for, like, let's say we had an opening for a grad coach, and you had it posted, and it's posted half the year, and you don't find anybody. Well, now you might be looking at, $40,000 that doesn't get used. So we would be asking ourselves, how are we going to reallocate that? That still holds true to the purpose of the plan, and that's where the tiered planning list would come in. So these are some other items that didn't quite make it to the budget, but they're things we would love to be able to do if some money gets freed up in the budget. And we try to write these a little bit generalized on purpose. So they're not as specific as, say, a grad coach, but more family outreach, engagement, transportation services applies, because then it could fit multiple areas of need. And without having to redraft the whole plan and go through this whole process again, it allows some of that flexibility. And as you can see, we put some things in there, like I talked about, the requirements of early literacy, high dose tutoring, which has some specific definitions of what qualifies, or extended day opportunities, very specific things that qualify. So those are in here because as money gets freed up, we can reallocate to those requirements that are required under early literacy.
Tim, in all of this, the state came up with all the requirements for the changes at the school, that locks have to be, or handles this way and doors that way. Is that,
That is a completely different.
we don't have to deal with, that's nothing in here?
That's not in here.
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
Because there was quite a list of,
yeah, all of those costs for the ADA and the compliance and all that good stuff that we have to do, that's a completely different
Okay.
process. And unfortunately, a lot of that cost is gonna have to come out of our general fund.
yeah, I know it was a lot.
Yeah. Next slide. There is one other thing here I didn't put on the slides on the back of your, on this page here on the bottom, and that was the early literacy allowable uses. You had to, whether or not you spent money in these 4 areas on the left, your plan had to address all 4 areas. In other words, we still have to do you don't see a dollar amount associated with extended learning, you see it on the tiered planning list. But we have to provide some sort of extended learning opportunity within these 2 years that's focused on early literacy achievement. Same with high-dose tutoring. High-dose tutoring, our Title I program does qualify for the high-dose tutoring component. So that's where the funds are braided again. And this grant also requires, the early literacy piece of it requires a 25% district match, but they don't really care where the match comes from. So in this case, the match is Title I funding. Should Title I funding get cut, we would have to find another source for the 25% match. So again, here you're seeing more of an overview of the performance measures that the state uses to define success. There are common things you see again on the state report cards. What will be developed, it's a great acronym and I try not to say it wrong, LPGTs, the Longitudinal Performance Growth Targets. So we will be developing longitudinal performance growth targets in unison with the state as a next step to this process. So again, we have to make sure that overall we have these 4 sort of areas that we have to hit: well-rounded education, equity, advanced, engaged community, strengthening district systems and capacity. And then the first 2 will be measured with those LPGTs. And then there's some of the eligibility requirements of the high school success and of the state Perkins targets. Over here we have performance auditing. So part of the requirements for this are to have the independent audit completed and have a clean audit. And so those are pieces that get submitted as part of the reporting, just all in line with that transparency and trust we want to develop. And then we submit quarterly program and financial reports to keep the state and taxpayers, if they're looking for the information, up to date on the progress of our district. And then there's an annual performance review as well, which also then comes back to the board. So earlier this year, we reviewed what we did last year with the grant. Okay, next slide. We'll make sure this is posted as well on the district webpage. And is there another piece to this? I didn't know it did that when I filled it in.
Very professional.
That's IT.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's pretty cool. That was automatic. Like, I should have just played it off. So again, you see that the 5 common metrics, we see those used for lots of grants, lots of performance. And then the final one will be the development of the local performance metrics. And so later tonight, you'll be looking at a lot of the things we use as local performance metrics, which will end up being part of this that will then again kind of work with the state to use as our success indicators for this grant and also for our strategic plan. Okay? So here we are, the very first tile of this process. We are in the blue space here. We are looking at public review and board approval of this part of the plan. All the narrative components, all the budgetary components that are planned. If this gets approved tonight, which would be great, then we'll submit this application. It's due by April 30th, and then the state reviews it. And then that will be our next step, submitting to OT, they take it in, they do the plan and full budget review. Then there's this QALP is like quality, it's a team, quality, I can't remember the acronym, quality learning program. So it's a public team of people that actually review our plan to make sure that they think that it's okay that we spend our money this way too. This was one of the things that when Student Success Act, SIA came out, there was a lot of concern around this because the plans these teams are generally composed of people from other areas of the state, not necessarily representing our local districts. But we do know that if they find anything that they feel is not up to par, that they'll come back to us and work with us on updating the plan. Then the state will co-develop the LPGTs and local option metrics with us. And then those get submitted, and then a grant agreement gets sent out, and then I will be back presenting the local performance growth targets and doing another public comment section, and then approval at that level.
How long does that take?
And the grant agreement as well. You also have to approve the grant agreement on this one.
How long does this process take?
I'm hoping before we start next school year.
It's quality assurance learning panels.
Thank you. Learning panel, that was the word, that, couldn't figure out that. Quality assurance learning panel,
Nice.
tell us.
Gotta love all the acronyms.
Yeah,
Alphabet soup.
we did, when we did it for SIA last time, we did go through the process before the start of the following school year. So this should be happening over the course of the next 2-3 months. And with that, we have questions or comments, and then the next step would be public
I have a
hearing.
question.
Yeah.
So way back on page 11, there was, you were talking about,
11 of the,
page 11 in
okay.
here. The only thing I remember is, does it specifically identify a student so that you can find that student, so you can help that student? Or is it kind of a broadcast of a group?
Let me just refresh my memory here.
Yeah, I don't remember, because I thought, oh, that's a good question, and now I don't remember why I wrote it down, except for the fact that I was.
Well, when we look at the inclusive excellence, kind of disaggregating the data, breaking it apart by student groups.
Mhm.
So, and then we do then break it down another level. So we are constantly breaking down data to the student level. So again, depending on what level you're looking at it at, so at the board level or at the district administrative level, we might not be driving down to the specific student level every time.
But does it get there somewhere?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and I could let David and Bruce speak to that, because
Okay.
those focal student groups, special education is a huge focal student group.
Right.
So, yeah, how do we break down, the data to the actual individual student level? Where do we see that in our schools? That was actually a live question.
For me, well, of course, in special education, it's your IEP where you're meeting as a team and considering student needs and creating a plan.
Okay, so it does actually help you filter to find that one student, to find where they need to have growth.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we are constantly looking at data and really
Okay.
drilling down to.
And you're doing that through different teams, data teams, monitoring progress on the standards as you go through some of our interim assessments that we're giving, the STAR testing, the DIBELS testing
Right.
at the elementary level. Those that are not making progress that they're supposed to be making, that's where we go in, provide that extra intervention and support, work with parents to ensure that we close that gap.
Okay. Is it usually very successful when you find that one student or those two students and you actually focus on them? Is that usually
Depends
successful?
on the reasoning behind it. Sometimes if it's a learning disability, it
Right.
takes longer to get them there.
Okay.
And we close the gap and they learn, it's difficult to close the gap when the learning is growing. What our expectation is growing, if they learn a little bit slower, it takes a little bit longer. And that gap may grow a little bit even though they're learning.
Right,
So growth for them looks a little different.
right.
So it's a difficult question because if we
Yeah.
could stop what they're supposed to, the knowledge from increasing, they would eventually meet it, but the knowledge is growing
Yeah.
as they're doing it, so it's difficult.
That makes sense.
Constantly catching up.
Right. But we have to have a plan that meets their needs,
Right.
that they're capable of achieving and feeling that success as they do that. And I think that's what we work on, and that's why we individualize it as we go through, because it looks different for every student.
And it becomes individualized even before they get into special education. If we're looking at that individual student data and we're not seeing the growth that we would anticipate and we're hoping to see, despite our efforts, then we have a process that goes into, and we collect a team together and start hitting it a little harder on an individual level and try to get that progress. And then sometimes we get it, and sometimes that student ends up going through the special education process.
I'm going to be a timekeeper. We're going to try to be at the high school library and starting in 14 minutes.
I have one really quick question. On
Better
just,
open the hearing.
or either that or I approve it and I ask you later. I could do that too.
Ask away.
Ask a question.
Okay, on page 8 of this, where it's talking about removal of barriers, a recent review of the CTE program has led to the removal of previous instructor approval or recommendation requirements for CTE courses. This change was implemented to ensure that students are not inadvertently excluded. I'm just trying to understand what that meant.
You would have seen in our previous course catalog for the high school, some entrance requirements to certain CTE programs or classes that required the instructor to actually approve the student. And through one of our internal audits, we essentially discovered that by removing that requirement, we can increase opportunities for students and because they shouldn't necessarily always have to have that instructor approval. They should be able to register for the class that they want to register for.
Okay. With the exception of like construction 2, you need to do construction 1
Right,
first.
meet the
Correct, there might be
Yeah,
a
that's
prerequisite,
different.
but there would have been, you might have seen that prerequisite and instructor approval.
Right.
But if the
And
student
why was
needs,
there, when there was an instructor approval, what were they looking for? A certain grade point average? Like, why were they not being accepted into the
Any number of
class?
things. It could be, and honestly, one of the reasons why is because it could be because they don't think girls should be in welding. I'm just, that's an example.
Right,
We're not
okay.
saying bitch.
as an extreme, right?
We could say
right.
something as simple as, maybe you should think about being a secretary. Go into business instead.
But we want the opportunity for that person to
Yeah,
take the classes
okay.
they want, so that's increasing those opportunities for them.
Okay,
Although it's still okay to have auditions in performance, like band and choir.
Yeah.
You can still audition.
that makes sense. Because there's still the opportunity of another option. That's,
Another quick thing, I was looking through here, but is there actually a list of the CTE choices in here? Or is it vague because it might be changing or?
This is more about the overview of it, not the specific program, but you're
Okay.
right, it doesn't actually list the choices in here.
Okay,
You would
because
see that,
someone just looking at this might wonder what's offered, but then that's shown elsewhere.
I wondered the same thing.
Well, yeah, and those kind of things, that's our course catalog that shows you that we have state-approved programs in construction and welding and health occupations and business
Culinary.
and culinary, right? So, I mean, we can say all those things, but we don't, this isn't the place to list that.
Okay.
There's an assumption that we have state-approved professional
Okay.
CTE programs, so.
which is, yeah, I mean, that's great that you noticed that and asked that question.
Okay, agenda item 3A, open public hearing. It's open.
it's open.
Agenda item 3B, public comments and questions.
So the open public hearing, I think you wanna announce the opening and then announce the closing. Is I believe how that one works.
Okay, so it's open. And there's an appropriate amount of silence we will have. That's it. Okay, we will, agenda item 3C, we're closing the public hearing. Nobody was here or online, Joe? Correct?
No, the only one online is a staff member.
Okay. All right,
Hi, Heather. Hi, Heather. We'll be there soon, Heather.
all right.
Thanks for watching.
With that, agenda item 4, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Oh, we gotta-
Oh, I'm sorry, hold on. Man, I was ready to go out the door.
Oh.
So excited.
I move we approve the integrated guidance plan as set forth above.
There's
A
a
second.
motion. Okay, there's a motion and a second. The motion is I move to approve the integrated guidance plan as set forth above. Any further discussion?
Could I recommend you have a roll call vote
You can.
on this?
Okay. All right, no further discussion. We will have a roll call vote. With that, Julie Pease, aye.
Aye.
Mary Schilling, Michelle Roberts, Carol Yardley. Aye. Nathan McClintock, Jim Jordan, aye. Dallas Petenbrink.
Aye.
He was waiting for that.
Yeah.
I was waiting to see if you got the last name.
I always give a little pause just to make them think I'm gonna go wrong. I'm gonna just say it wrong. Just
One of these
just to
days,
throw
yeah, you'll do it again.
And then now we would like to adjourn.
Adjourn, thank you.
5:51.
Are we adjourned?
Okay.
Yes, we're adjourned.
All